This is So Fail, So Good, the podcast that changes the way we talk about failure from women who've lived through it and learned. Today on the show, we have Maria Jacquemetton, the writer-producer on a little show called Mad Men. She and her writing partner, also her husband, Andre, have won 3 Emmys, 4 Writers Guild of America awards, and 2 Producers Guild awards for Producer of the Year. And guys, Maria wrote the late 90s classic Billboard Dad. You remember the movie starring Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, where they print a personal ad on a billboard for their newly single dad? It was a classic, and it's really bringing me back. Maria is completely gracious and humble, and it is an honor to share her story with you. One that certainly has its share of high highs and low lows. Now, on to the show. Maria Jacquemetton, hello. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to just jump right in, and we will start from the beginning. So what was your first ever job, first paycheck you ever got?
Well, my first ever paycheck, I'm assuming you mean in the industry, not working at Linden Cleaners or...
No, that's what I want to know about.
Okay.
The earliest days.
My first job ever, my mother got me a job at the local dry cleaner in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where I grew up, working the front desk and stuffing dirty clothes into bags and throwing them in the back for the cleaner. So that was my first job. And that started a long string of jobs over the summer and during the school year that included being a cake decorator and working in a head shop called Idiot's Delight. This was the 70s. And the graveyard shift at Mr. Donut, all sorts of crazy stuff. But I always worked. It was, my mom was a believer in make your own money, stand on your own 2 feet, and you'll feel better about yourself. So as soon as I could get that work permit from City Hall, I was working part-time jobs.
Awesome. And you mentioned Massachusetts, so that's where you grew up, right?
Yes, I grew up in Wellesley, college town outside of Boston.
And then you went off to Lehigh, correct? Did you?
Yes, I went to Lehigh University undergraduate where I majored in English. And after that, I wanted to go and get a graduate degree. It was actually something that my father felt strongly about, that his children would all earn, higher education. He was a big, believer in education will get you far and is never wasted. And so I was given the choice of any kind of graduate degree I wanted to pursue, and he would pay for it. And so I wanted to go for something in the arts, something that involved writing, because I'd always wanted to be a writer. And I had a roommate during a college year abroad who convinced me that rather than go and get a master's in writing or English, that I should pursue a film degree because I loved movies so much. So I ended up applying to Boston University College of Communication, and I went there for my master's in film production.
So you end up out in Boston, and what do you remember enjoying about film school?
Well, film school, this was the mid 80s, so there were not as many film schools as there are today, certainly. But BU did have a pretty well-known one, at least on the East Coast. And the thing that I loved about it was, and I think it's probably true of all graduate programs, if you're in graduate school, you're primarily studying something that you have a passion for. And so it was an opportunity for 2 years to be just absolutely immersed in learning about film theory and learning how to write a screenplay and getting your hands on old 16 millimeter film equipment and soundboards and editing suites. This was before the days of Avid and computer technology. So we actually, spliced with a little metal splicer and learned how to edit films using, they're called Steenbecks. It was a machine with, spool reel-to-reel sound and film. Just roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, learn by doing and by making mistakes. So that was amazing. And I would say the other thing that I really loved about film school was the people there. Not only the instructors, who are all, either individuals who'd spend their lives studying film theory or writing, but also documentary filmmakers. So they were people who had hands-on experience in the industry. and that was great to learn from them. And then there was, of course, the group of students that were there with you who were all studying the same thing and all super passionate about filmmaking. And those people, those individuals that I met in graduate school ended up becoming some of my dearest friends in life. And also colleagues later on when it came time to get out, get a job, and start working in the field.
So when you do graduate and you make the big move out to LA, is that right away after graduation?
No, I actually worked while I was in film school. I got a job. Well, actually, first I got an internship at a company called Counter Productions. It was a Cambridge-based production company, a husband and wife team. They did documentaries and docudramas for the local NBC affiliate. And I was the intern who got hired. I was, jack of all trades. I would do everything from, carrying equipment to researching projects that they wanted to make a documentary about. Eventually, they hired me when I graduated, and they kind of prompted me to write my master's thesis because they had an idea that they wanted to make into a miniseries. So I actually ended up writing a television miniseries script, 400 some odd pages for my master's thesis through that internship.
Wow.
So that was my actual first job in the business.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Whatever happened to that script?
It's in my file cabinet in my bedroom in Wellesley. Nothing. No, I graduated from my master's program with it, but it's one of the things that probably will never see the light of day.
So after that internship, you then make the big move. You move out to LA.
So at that time period, late 80s was sort of like a boom. Either move to New York or Los Angeles. And the ones that were in Los Angeles, whenever I talked to them, they were saying, come on out here. There's jobs. Come to Hollywood. It's so great. It's exciting. And I thought to myself, well, I can move to New York, which is a, quick train ride down the East Coast, or I can move to LA now and come back to New York later when I, have tried the West Coast. And I figured I could always come back to New York. So I went to LA, and when I got here, I just fell in love with it, and I never looked back. I was really lucky. I could type 90 words a minute. So my first job was through a temp agency who sent me to creative artists. Now, that CAA was one of and continues to be one of the big agencies in the business. They put me at a desk where there was a young literary agent who was sending out a lot of letters and a lot of correspondence. And now, again, this was before computers, so everything had to be typed on an IBM Selectric typewriter. And because I could type so quickly, they put me on his desk as his assistant. And, there I stayed for about six months, I'd say. And from that job, I parlayed that position into another job working for a studio executive at Paramount. That was sort of the first in a list of, a long list of assistant jobs working for producers, directors, and eventually becoming a writer's assistant on a sitcom. Now, that was really the job where I felt that, I was going to be able to make the jump into what I really wanted to be doing, which was writing scripts.
And then at what point here you got this Disney fellowship? Was that while you were the writer's assistant on a sitcom?
Yes, it was. So being a writer's assistant on a sitcom, it's sort of like a crash course in writing for television, because you're sitting in the room with the writing team on a given show, and they are pitching jokes, pitching the story, breaking the outline for the scripts, rewriting the pages while you're sitting in there taking notes. So what you're doing basically as the assistant is you're putting together the pages of the script according to what the writers want, but you're also sort of learning about the process. And the biggest thing that I learned in that job really was that writing, at least for television, is about rewriting. Mm-hmm. We worked long hours, and during this time period where I was doing this job, there was a lot of downtime. And I would just sit at my desk in my spare time and work on my own scripts. So the ABC Disney Fellowship really was my big break, and it came along during that time because I had been writing scripts and sending them into every fellowship and contest that I could. And eventually I was accepted into the Disney Fellowship, and then that allowed me to sort of quit my day job and, be paid to be an actual writer.
That's amazing. And so you're working for Disney now for this fellowship. What was that experience like? What does that entail to be part of a fellowship with Disney?
Well, really what these fellowships are designed as are sort of training grounds for writers that have a degree of skill already, but who have not actually gotten sort of their big break, or, they've been able to kind of get their foot in the door, but they haven't been paid as an actual writer. So there, at least the Disney Fellowship, at the time that I was in it, was designed to treat the writers that were in it kind of like the old studio system, where you'd have a writer under contract, and that writer would come in and pitch script ideas, and then they would work with an executive or a handful of executives to hone one of those ideas into a screenplay. You'd pitch it, you'd put it, you'd go through the writing process with it, with the idea of the studio actually putting that script forth to production. One of the things that we did in the fellowship really early on was they put us through what they called pitch school. Basically, that was taking the 10, 15 fellows and putting you in a room with several executives, where they would sort of guide you through the process of pitching a 2-minute pitch, a 20-minute pitch, an hour pitch. What are the details that need to be included? How do you keep your audience engaged? How do you get your excitement and your idea and the reason why you're the person who has to write this project through to the person that's buying it in a given amount of time? So, I mean, that's something that, I don't think you really learn that except by doing it, unless you're one of the people in the world who's blessed with the gift of gab, which I really wasn't at that age, believe it or not, because I'm talking nonstop now.
It sounds like you learned a ton through this program, and really,
really
real world. Yeah. And through it, you wrote a couple scripts, one of which it got picked up, which is just huge. And for any 90s kid like me, this movie was a classic that is really nostalgic. It's stars Mary-Kate and Ashley. You've all probably heard of it. Billboard Dad. Oh my gosh. I watched the trailer in excitement for our call today, and there's just so many moments when she says cool to the max and he's a hunkosaurus, and thinking that about the fact that you wrote this script. I mean, it's so fun for me. So tell me, what was that like to have your first script made into an actual movie? And did it feel like, okay, I'm in Hollywood?
Yes and yes. Okay, so, that's the holy grail, right? Getting one of your scripts made. As a writer, you have to love the act of writing itself, but the payoff, getting your work brought to life, is really elusive. Actors bring so much to the script, but also, being able to see how one sentence of stage direction that you write down on the page can actually inspire and get translated by all these amazing craftsmen and artists into sets, into shots, the production design, the costume design, just like everything that goes into creating, film or television. The jumping off point is the sentence that you write on a page. So not only is that incredibly heady, but it's also an amazing learning experience. Because you don't want to overwrite your stage direction, and a lot of writers do that early in their career. I certainly was guilty of it. But the only way to really understand that is when you actually see your script be turned into, get produced. So that was super exciting. Look, it was like I felt like every day I got up and said, "Pinch me." Is my show actually getting made? One of the coolest things, other than going to the set and sitting in the reading with Mary-Kate and Ashley and having them, kind of read through the script, where there's a process. It's called a table read. Basically, it's done more in television than in film. But we did it for this project, and I sat there with the director and the producer and Mary-Kate and Ashley and their assistant, and they were kids at the time, so they had a lot of supervision around them, and they read through the script together. And there were places where we would laugh, and places where where you could hear where maybe it was dragging on in a scene, or you needed to adjust the dialogue, or a scene wasn't working. And so it's very helpful for the writer, but it's also super fun because that's the first time you get to see your script on its feet. So that was really exciting. And then, of course, being on set, going to visit and watching the production go on. But this is going to sound silly, but there was one thing that I was really excited about, and that was after the movie was produced and it was out and it had been successful, the company Disney made actually two little they're dolls basically. They're Mary Kate and Ashley dolls, and they put out a box set with the book, like the novelization of the movie, and the two dolls in it. And I remember being really, really excited about that. So there you go.
It's so cool. I mean, your script came to life, and that must
It
have
did.
been just incredible to witness. And so what happens after Billboard Dad?
So, well, here's the thing. Once you get a credit, you're sort of like, you have the stamp of approval for other people to hire you. So, I had this credit and it got produced and it was doing well. And, that just led to other work.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I decided shortly after Billboard Dad got produced that we wanted to team up. He had been working for a producer as a development executive and writing on the side as well. And, really it came down to like a life choice. We wanted to be together in our careers, and we saw that writing together was a way that we could be, not only a bona fide creative team, but also a team, a life team, a team together.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have to be separated to go in production in different places. If one of us was working long hours, we'd both be working long hours. We just kind of felt like that's what we wanted. So we teamed up, we wrote some scripts together, and eventually one of them landed on the desk of a producer who liked our work very much. And we were hired by him to work on Baywatch Hawaii, which is a spinoff of the original Baywatch, as our first actual staff job on a television series.
Which means you got to live in Hawaii, is that right?
We get to live in Hawaii. We spend a little over a year there writing on staff, learning about production. We had a very small writing staff on that show. So Andre and I, as staff writers, which is sort of the entry level rung when you go in on a production, we got to go to set and we got to write quite a bit. We got to learn a lot about production that we normally would not have sort of been privy to at that level because we did have such a small staff.
Mm-hmm.
And also because we had a showrunner a man by the name of Frank South, who had been a real pro in the business for many years and was a big believer in you train your staff to come up through the ranks and you groom them as producers so that eventually they can, not only be more of an asset to you as the show develops, but also run their own show. Mm. So that was really, it was kind of a dream come true, to be honest, living in Hawaii, writing on this show, getting to go to the set, having produced credits to our name.
Yeah.
It was terrific.
I can only imagine. And after that, are you thinking, great, let's keep writing on this show? Can we stay in Hawaii, or was it on to the next project?
Well, sadly, that show was canceled by the network who owned it at the time. So we kind of had to make this decision. Do we want to stay in Hawaii? Do we want to come back to LA? It was early in our careers, and we, of course, wanted to keep working, and there was not a lot of opportunity at that time on Oahu. Of course, now there are like 5 or 6 shows there, but this was a different time. We kind of were the only show in town at that point. Again, we were able, through a script that we'd written that was a strong writing sample, landing on the right desk, to be hired on Star Trek Enterprise, which was go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, that's a big shift from Baywatch to Star Trek.
It is a big shift. So we had written, what happens when you're on a show is that you are being hired to write in the voice of the series. So that's your day job in a way. On the side, a lot of writers do what we call development. That means you work on projects that you're passionate about, that are things stories you really want to tell that may not resemble at all the show that you're working on day to day. So Andre and I had written a spec script that was a horror, like a very sort of classy horror movie. And that's the script that landed on the desk of the producer of Star Trek Enterprise. And because he was looking to hire writers who could write suspense and could write good characters and could create a world, but not necessarily be Trekkies or having been immersed in Trek lore, we sort of fit the bill.
Got it. Very cool.
So that's how we ended up there.
How long did you stay at Star Trek, and what do you remember loving and finding maybe challenging about that workplace?
Star Trek was a challenging environment. We were only there one season, the first season. It was challenging in a lot of ways and a very different experience from Baywatch in that, we did write quite a bit on the series, and we worked for some extremely talented people. But ultimately, I think because Andre and I weren't Trekkies, it was sort of like a one and done for us. We didn't stay on past that first season. It was also a lot of pressure on that show. It had a really rabid fan base. We were charged with creating stories that hadn't already been told. Now, you have to remember there was the original series. When you think about Star Trek, you had those seasons, the stories in that season, the stories in, Next Generation, which had run for many years, Deep Space Nine. So, there are only so many stories in the universe. So that was a major challenge, coming up with things that were new and that hadn't been done before in the Trek universe.
Sure.
So, that was, it was also a place where our hours were extremely long. We had a toddler at home. Our son was being raised by babysitters, and ultimately it was kind of a quality of life decision that we wanted to change. And, because we had struggled for so long before actually having success, we felt that we'd pay our dues. And so, it would be smooth sailing. We could leave that show and just get another job and be fine.
Sure. So you figure out, all right, this isn't the best work environment. Let's change things up. And so then what happens after you and Andre leave Star Trek?
So after we left Star Trek, I have to be honest, we were not prepared for the down period that was to come from that. We didn't get staffed the following year for one reason or another.
And when you say didn't get staffed, do you mean on Star Trek or just in general? That's kind of
in general. We left. What happens in television writing is you get hired onto a series. Well, yeah, I guess it's still sort of the same things have changed a bit with streaming, but during this time period in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, you would be hired on a series. You would hopefully last the whole season. If you stayed or were asked back or not, you would either go back for another year or you would look for another job and be staffed on another show. So you work at you're sort of like a journeyman writer until you get to the point where you're an upper level producer, and then you generally stay on the show for a longer period of time because you're involved in more day-to-day decision making that has nothing to do with just the writing process.
Got it.
But for us, we were fairly low level. We just assumed that we would go on to another show. And so your work gets sent around and you take meetings, and ideally you'll click with a producer who will hire you to be on on staff of whatever the show is that they're hiring writers for. But, some years you get staffed and some you don't. Early in our career, we didn't realize that. We just thought we were automatically going to get another job, and we did not get a full-time staff job. We did write some freelance episodes. We did sell a pilot. So, we were making money, but it was not certainly a steady paycheck like we'd been accustomed to. So, that was tough.
And during that time, so you now are starting to realize, all right, we're not getting hired full-time, and we can keep doing this freelancing, but during that time you made a move out to Virginia. Tell me about that time and that change.
Okay, so we did. So another thing that was happening during this time period after Star Trek, when we were just sort of freelancing and struggling a bit again, was that we adopted our daughter from Russia. So we were really feeling the pressure of having two small kids, no steady job. Our pilot didn't get picked, to go forward for production. It was kind of a setback. We were disappointed. And now, of course, we have two children. We're feeling the pressure, and we eventually had to face the hard truth that we were going to have to make a drastic change because a steady job just wasn't coming. So our best option, we felt, was to move back in with our parents, and Andre's mother invited us to come live with her in Virginia. So we packed up all our stuff in LA, sold some of our things, and we moved back east. We called it a new adventure. We tried to stay upbeat, but to be honest, it felt kind of like a last resort.
Right. And
Go ahead.
you know, do you remember those first few months? You move in with Andre's mom, and now you're sort of away from your writing career and the life that you knew before in LA. Do you remember the feelings that were coming up in those first few months?
Absolutely. It was difficult. I think, looking back, I was pretty depressed. Not that our life was awful by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't. We were living in a beautiful place. We were lucky to have parents who, had always supported us in this crazy career that we've chosen, who took us in 40 something years old with two kids without asking questions or imposing conditions on us. So, it wasn't all terrible, but it really felt emotionally, at least to me, like we were giving up on the dream. Not only the dream of being a writer, but really giving up on this sort of California dream that I'd had since I was a kid. I used to play with Malibu Barbie and watch beach blanket bingo movies and, be watching Sunday afternoon, all the old movies one after another and dreaming of the day when I was going to be part of that world. And so to leave it was a bummer.
And you'd gotten a taste of that world, and so I'm sure your identity is starting to feel a little bit wobbly. So do you remember just like an impact that you felt on your identity at that time as well?
Absolutely. There was definitely sadness. It felt like a loss of my identity. There's a lot of shame involved with, feeling like a failure, when in reality we weren't a failure. We were just in every career, especially creatives, we have highs and lows. We were just sort of in a gully for a while, but you don't know that when you're in it. You feel like this is the new normal.
Right.
And moving is stressful, especially when you're not 20 years old. And it's not, you're not doing it out of choice. It's sort of doing it because you have to.
Right.
And, I didn't know what I was going to be anymore. As long as I could remember, I'd wanted to be a writer. And I knew I was still a mother and a wife and a daughter-in-law and a person, but I was kind of untethered because up until this point, I'd been focused and driven on doing one thing. Also, I think because, I grew up in the 70s, I really had and continue to take a great deal of pride in, being a woman who's, self-made. I grew up during the women's movement. I believed that a woman could do anything. So to be unemployed and feel unemployable in my chosen field, those are things that obviously anyone who's out of a job, can feel like, but I personally felt it pretty deeply, I think.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, when you're in it, it feels like it's not a temporary, it feels permanent. And the reality is, of course, everything is temporary. And in hindsight, you can always look back with different memories. But I'm glad you talk about while you're in it, because that's something that I think a lot of people want to, wash over. And
Yes.
because it is the toughest time usually of our lives, if we look back and think of when did we feel like a failure internally. It's not something we want to relive and talk about, but there are so many people going through something difficult, and it can feel like, they're stuck in mud, or they can barely get a breath out. And so just knowing that, hey, it's temporary, and there's the light at the end of the tunnel is powerful.
So. Absolutely. I mean, I think that was my biggest takeaway. I mean, I think it's sort of corny sounding, but this too shall pass. That's the thing that, you have to tell yourself when you're in that well, but you're not really able to do it. You can't see your way out. At least that's how I felt.
And do you remember like the resilience, like where that came from, maybe specifically for you, to sort of say, well, yes, we're living with Andre's mom. I have two kids right now. This is not exactly where I want to be. But I need to keep moving forward and I need to keep going. And do you remember sort of what it was that made you keep fighting and keep going?
I do. So a couple of things. I think about something that happened when I was at a real low point during that time a lot. And that is my husband who's a true glass half full person, where I tend to be a glass half empty. I remember he said to me this one thing, that he didn't worry about what we were going to do because his own mother had started over when she was 40, and she'd built this successful insurance business by herself. And so there was no reason why we couldn't start over too. So that really resonated with me, and it's always stuck with me now, because your your battles and your lows don't stop just because you get out of one. They're always coming down the pike. So you have to remember
Mhm.
that. And the other thing that saved me was literally another strong, independent woman, and that was my mother-in-law. She graciously took me under her wing. She brought me into her business. I sort of became her sidekick when she went out and talked to groups, teachers groups, and the various, and sort of potential buyers for the type of insurance that she was selling. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And I also discovered that there were skills that I could develop that I didn't even know I had, that I could dig deep and kind of find inner resources to do something else, like to be good at something besides the thing that I thought I was going to be for the rest of my life, without giving up the hope that I could still, write and get back into, I don't know, just being creative.
Mhm.
And I also, honestly, we kept writing. Even though we didn't have any buyers, we kept writing scripts, because writers write whether you have someone waiting to read it or not. You can't help it. That's what you do. And I remember specifically, I wrote an article that I never even tried to get published, but it was just the act of writing that helped me. At the time, I was training to run the AIDS marathon, um, and writing this article about the process, having never really been an athlete before, and doing this undertaking, was really therapeutic for me, just to do something creative to battle that inner naysayer that was telling me, oh, your writing career is over. You're not going to do this. Find something else to do.
Right, just doing it for yourself.
Yeah, just doing it for myself.
So at this point, you're working for Andre's mom, and then you decide to start an actual a little shift. You start teaching, and you have to move.
Yes.
What was that transition?
Well, I'd always wanted to teach, but I thought I would do it later in life. So the interesting thing is, my dad had made me get this master's degree, and education is never wasted. I decided this was the time to look for a teaching job. I did have some credits. I had a lot of experience. I had things to share. And ironically, my husband's the one who actually found me the teaching job that I ended up accepting in Vancouver, Canada, at Vancouver Film School, running their writing program.
Hmm.
So we moved to Canada. We emigrated. And, we lived up there for 2 years until Mad Men happened.
So 2 years, and during that time, I'm guessing you're sort of getting in the groove and accepting, like, okay, I'm a teacher now. I'm a professor, and then you get a call about Mad Men. So tell me about this life-changing call.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm living up there. I'm really enjoying teaching, working with the students, the whole process of being involved in a very creative environment. Not only, teaching, but also I was learning quite a bit from the individuals that were in my classes, the students, both young and old. And we really have settled into our life up there. Of course, we're still writing on the side. My husband is really, running with that part of our career, because I had a full-time job and, was very actively, using my time towards that. But an interesting thing happened years earlier when we were back in LA. At the very start of our careers, we had been in a writing group with Matthew Weiner, the creator of Mad Men. Now, this writing group was a bunch of assistants, and we would get together once every week or so at a coffee shop called Stir Crazy, that's still there on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles. And we would pitch ideas to each other. We would bring in pages that we'd written. We'd sort of workshop our scenes, and we do a lot of complaining about whatever assistant job we had. So it was sort of like creative support group.
Yeah.
But because of that, Matt and Andre and I had always gelled very well creatively. We liked the way he wrote. He liked the way we wrote. We had stayed in touch and become friends over the years. And while we were working on Enterprise at Paramount, he was working on Becker, and we would get together periodically. During that time period, he had written the pilot for Mad Men as a spec script. We had read it and said to him, "This is so great, Matt. We would love to work on a show like this. If you ever get it, produced, I don't know where we're going to be, but please, think of us to work on the show with you." So lo and behold, I get a phone call in Canada. Guess what? My show's going from Matthew Weiner. Would it really mess up your life if I asked you to come back here and work on it? And so, of course, the answer was no. But it was, as all writing jobs are, you generally have like a short-term contract that gets picked up for a longer term if things work out. And so because Andre and I were not certain about how long not only we were going to stay on the show, but how long the show itself was going to run, it was it's in its very nascent stages. We didn't want to move all of our belongings and our kids back to the US.
Right.
Our kids were in school, and, it's quite an undertaking to move over the border. So Andre and I, the two of us moved to LA, and our mothers traded off moving into our home in Vancouver and watching our kids for about 5-6 months while we worked on the show.
That is incredible.
It was.
Your
family
is amazing.
That is true. And it was really, not only was it, a huge sacrifice that they made for us, but it actually ended up being really great for our children because they got to know their grandmothers in a way that, they probably otherwise wouldn't have.
Absolutely. And so now, after you're spending this back and forth time, 5-6 months, what happens with the show?
So the show, the first season was really interesting. We never thought we were going to get picked up for a second season. We just were writing this amazing series that was a show that I remember Matthew Weiner saying to us during the very beginning of, the story breaking process in the room, let's just do a show that we would watch. We don't know if this is going to get picked up, if it's going to be successful or not. Let's write the show that we would want to watch. And so we really did that. The ratings were not good. The first season, we never knew if we were going to be coming back for the second season. In fact, we went back up to Vancouver when we wrapped production thinking, who knows what's going to happen. We're just going to stay in Vancouver now and, continue living our lives. But the press really embraced the series in a way that brought it to the public attention, increased our ratings, and really, I think gave AMC the impetus to pick it up. And then we go and the awards start coming as we go into season 2. Pressure to be better than the year before started being mounted on us as writers, on staff. But even with that, it was really a magical and really kind of a surreal time for us having that kind of, creative success after having been so unsure of our future just, a relatively short time earlier.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure, it must have just felt like a whirlwind. You're now on a hit show. You're writing for a hit show. And did you think, maybe not after that first season because it was a little bit uneasy with the ratings, but by the second or third season, were you thinking we made it and this is it and this is our new life? Or what were you feeling then?
Definitely felt like, oh my gosh, how did this all turn around? And this is our dream come true. We never thought it was actually going to happen. And there we were, I remember standing on the stage I guess it was the second year, maybe it was the first year we won the Emmy. And, you're looking out over this audience and there's in the front row, Tom Hanks and all these huge stars that, people that I have admired and continue to admire my whole life. And I'm like, what? I'm in a room with these people, let alone on the stage with them. So it's totally, it's crazy dream come true stuff. It really is. And we thought, hey, we made it now. We're going to be able to, it's just up from here. There's no down. And, I have to say, it wasn't a very realistic attitude to have at the time, but when we were in it, it wasn't that we didn't appreciate it. We appreciated it more because I think, we'd seen the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been down, so we really appreciated it when we finally got back up again.
Absolutely. So after 7 seasons, countless awards, Mad Men aired its final episode in 2015. Mm-hmm. And so what was it like to be part of such a legacy and iconic series?
like I said, it was really a dream come true for us, and a lot of it was a bit surreal in hindsight. Um, you know, but as seasons went on, it sort of became our new reality. We were working on a series that was a labor of love, and that was beloved by so many people. By the way, it also had its haters too, but
Sure.
overall we would you wouldn't really hear from the haters except online. We didn't really think about legacy or the show being iconic. We just continued to keep our heads down and do the work. We thought about story,
Hmm.
we thought about character. The room was a very highly functioning group of individuals. We were incredibly lucky to be in there with some of the greatest, writers, I think, working in the business, and some of them are deceased now, who, we were in there with Frank Pearson, who wrote Dog Day Afternoon, and, the Barbara Streisand version of A Star is Born, and Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown, for goodness sakes. We were really, really lucky to have worked with individuals like that. But, you're doing the work on a daily basis. You're in there trying to come up with stories that would surprise and entertain the audience. But not only the audience, we still went back to, we want to surprise and entertain ourselves. What's the show that we would want to watch?
Hmm. So, I mean, because I can't be the only listener dying to know this, and speaking of talent, what was it like to work with the young Elizabeth Moss and now see her in just this epic role as June Osborne in Handmaid's Tale?
She is one of the most amazing actresses of our generation. I mean, and you could see it on Mad Men when we worked with her. She's deep, she's instinctive, she's incredibly courageous, and she's also a phenomenal person. She's also an incredibly smart producer. So, I have nothing but enormous respect and admiration for her. And quite quite honestly, I'm awed by what she's been able to accomplish, especially, with that show, Handmaid's Tale, which is kind of a miracle that it's on the air, given
Right.
the present,
Yeah.
climate that we live in. Um, she's amazing, and I'm feel so fortunate that we were able to work with her.
Okay, so where is Maria Jacquemetton now, and what are you dreaming big about?
Well, having our own show, and by that I mean a show that Andre and I create, that's still the holy grail for us. We've been close several times to getting one of our development projects going, into production, but so far that's eluded us. So that's really what I'm dreaming big about. But, on sort of a realistic day-to-day level, right now I just dream about working with good people. That's just become my goal. Smart,
Mm-hmm.
talented people who have something to say that's positive. And most importantly, people that are decent human beings, because there are a lot of toxic personalities in any industry, but certainly in this one. And, life's too short and the work's too life consuming to be surrounded by those kind of people. That's something I could deal with when I was younger, but I don't have the patience for that anymore. So we really just look for good people to work with. And that's what I'm dreaming about.
I love it. And okay, last question, Maria. So hindsight is everything. It is such a powerful thing. And knowing what you know now, where you are now, what advice would you have given yourself, during that year that you faced a lot of challenges and just that feeling of failure?
So, again, I think the biggest lesson for me, and the thing that I would say to anyone who's going through a time period like that, is that this too shall pass. It does sound corny, but it's really good advice. Keep your head down, do good work. You'll come out of this.
Absolutely.
What's more, you'll have learned something from the tough times, from that feeling of failure, not just how to better deal with adversity, but that you're capable of more than you thought. And, if you're a parent, just remember that your children are watching how you deal with this difficult time. So, I guess be the example you want them to see.
That's very well said. Thank you, Maria, so much for joining us, for your time. I've had so much fun talking to you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. I've had fun talking to you too.
Did you notice that throughout Maria's journey, relationships were key? I actually got connected with Maria because of my mother-in-law. They were roommates in college, and they still keep in touch. Just another relationship that Maria has held dear and cared about. Hearing Maria's story, I couldn't help but notice how important the relationships in her life were in both getting through the hardest times and also reaching her highest success. Which is interesting because she's a writer, a profession, I mean, at least for myself, I see as a solitary pursuit. And in her early days of writing, she made the conscious choice, really a lifestyle choice, to be writing partners with her husband, Andre. And, I mean, their relationship was just so important to her that she somehow had the foresight to recognize how much more rich and fulfilling the experience would be if they were writing together. She also had this relationship with her mother-in-law that gave her a lifeline when she really needed it, and the relationship with the grandparents who stepped in to help with Maria and Andre's kids when they got the call from Mad Men. And, of course, her relationship with Matt Weiner, meeting at the same coffee shop every week to write with this writing group, building that relationship with him and other writers. She had no idea what would come of it, no expectations, just spending the time. Watering her plants is what I like to call it. It's something I learned from my graphic designer at Minnie and Paul, Claudia Dubé. It really stuck with me. So she told me that when she was younger, her mom would ask her if she was watering her plants. And I was confused. I had no idea what that meant. And she said, well, I mean, if you want meaningful relationships, her mom would explain, that requires cultivation. Are you checking in? Are you caring about them? Do you remember the important things, the important dates? Are you there for them during difficult times? And I mean, it seems basic. Like, of course, that's just being a good friend 101. But we all can get wrapped up. We're all so busy. And with Maria's story, it always seemed like she had the time for love and connection with people important to her. Today's resource is an article from Medium. It's titled, Relationships Are Like Gardening. You Reap What You Sow. And the article parallels the similarities between actual gardening and developing relationships. It's a quick read, and it reminds us, in terms of effort, you will get out what you put in. Thank you so much for listening to So Fail, So Good. If you want to know more about the show or today's guest, visit sofailsogood.com. This is a Matriarch Digital Media production. Executive producer Twyla Dang. And if you want to know more about Matriarch or other podcasts on the network, head to matriarchdm.com.